The vote had been 4,847 to 1. The number hung in the spire of votes like a smell that would not clear, heavy and wrong in the recycled air. Archon Koreth Vex did not look at the tally. He looked at the one. A Kavani delegate, no taller than a human child, held a data crystal in both hands like an offering she did not want to give. Her name was Saren Tall. Her fingers were pale. The crystal caught the frozen rain light from the ceiling and threw it back in a thin blue line across the tiered stone. Vex's joints ached. 847 years of calcification made every movement a negotiation. He rose from the presiding seat. His ceremonial plate armor caught the light, etched with the names of 7 species he had already erased. The flat rhythm of his voice filled the chamber. Humanity has been a member of this body for 214 years. The Security Council finds them administratively non-compliant. Earth is marked for destruction. The cleansing will begin in 18 hours. No one spoke. 6,300 respiratory chemistries processed the same air in silence. The crystal ceiling, 800 meters above, showed frozen rain caught in pale stone. The spire had stood for 11,000 years. It had never heard a vote this lopsided go so quietly wrong. Vex sat. The Kavani delegate did not. She stood alone in her tier, the data crystal still raised, and for a moment her eyes, small, dark, steady, met his. Then she turned and walked out. The doors sealed behind her with a hiss that sounded, to Vex's ears, like a held breath finally released. He did not blink. He had not blinked during a vote in 200 years. I wish I could tell you the one changed anything. It didn't. But she carried something out of that chamber that 4,847 others left behind. Stay close. The signal reached Ganymede Command 14 minutes later. Admiral Mara Sen was pouring tea when it arrived. The ceramic cup was chipped along one rim, fired in Osaka in the year her grandmother had been born. The steam rose. Her left thumb found the dent in her son's flask, the same dent from the hull breach 14 years ago, and she began to count. The flask was steel. It had been his. She carried it in her coat pocket always, and when she calculated casualties, the thumb moved. She did not know she did it. She had stopped knowing years ago. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Desai's voice came through the open channel. The ledger is awake. Sen set the cup down. The tea was still hot. She did not drink it. How many? All of them, ma'am. The conclave voted. It's in the open stream. Sen's thumb stopped on the dent. She looked at the cup. The steam was thinning. Somewhere in the Kuiper dark, shipyards that had never been named in public began to warm their forges. She had never seen them. She had signed the orders that kept them hidden. Sound General Quarters, she said, and get me Captain Vance. Elias Vance was feeding his dog when the alarm hit. Sergeant was a mutt, some mix of shepherd and indifference, 12 years old and gray in the muzzle. Vance sat on the floor of his quarters, the remote camera angled so the dog could see his face while the kibble poured. The scramble siren cut through the feed. Sergeant kept eating. Sorry, buddy, Vance said. I have to go. He stood. The dog did not look up. Vance checked his fighter's status on the wall screen: fuel, ordnance, the koi fish painted on the nose cone by his daughter 6 years ago, already peeling near the tail. He was 41. He had been flying for 19 years. He hummed something old, a folk song his mother had sung, while he pulled on his flight jacket. The hangar on Ganymede smelled of ozone and cold metal. Desai was already at the tactical board, her stylus tapping twice, then twice again, a nervous habit she had never broken. A photograph was taped to the edge of her console, her daughter's first steps on Mars, the red dust bright against the white suit. She was 33. She had a daughter who did not know what the ledger was. Captain, Sen's voice came over the command channel, flat and patient. The Korvathi fleet will drop from warp in 4 hours, 6,000 ships, standard suppression diamond. Vance stopped humming. That's extinction-level deployment, Admiral. Yes, Sen said, it is. She stood in the command center, the flask in her pocket, the chipped cup cooling on her desk. Around her, screens woke one by one, showing orbital mechanics, dark side signatures, the quiet math of a fleet that had been building for 187 years. No politician had spoken the shipyard's name in public. No trade audit had found them. The Cavani had noticed once, 90 years ago, in a routine review of resource allocation. They had said nothing. They had kept the human agreements in good faith. Sen looked at the main display. The Corvathi suppression fleet was still 4.2 light hours out, but the trajectory was already certain. The unyielding verdict, Fleet Master Drueth's flagship, led the formation. 3.2 kilometers of matte black hull. She had studied the files. She knew the specifications better than she knew her own ship. Desai, she said, wake the iron harvest. Desai's stylus stopped tapping. Her hand hovered over the board. Then she keyed the sequence. Deep in the Kuiper dark, where no telescope had looked for 2 centuries, something vast stirred. The Murasame, Sen's old frigate, now a dreadnought 2.8 kilometers long. The Osaka, the Ganymede, the Silent Ledger. Names that did not appear in any registry the Conclave had ever seen. Mobile construction platforms the size of small moons turned their forges from standby to active. Thermal blooms spread across sensors like a held breath finally released. Vance watched the feed from his cockpit. The koi fish on his fighter's nose seemed to swim in the dark. Admiral, he said, how long have they been building? Sen's thumb found the dent. She did not answer. The count was already running in her head, one number for every species that had raised a hand against her world. Fleet Master Drueth reviewed Earth's file one final time before the drop. His bridge was a cathedral of matte black carapace and compound optical arrays, 6 limbs arranged for maximum efficiency, his tactical officer Thess already running pre-engagement checks. Thess was young, eager, her arrays flickering with the pleasure of a clean mission. The suppression diamond was textbook. 6,000 ships, 2.4 million personnel, a species that filed trade disputes and built nothing of note. Minimal fleet, Drueth said, his voice a low vibration through the carapace speakers. No orbital defenses logged. Population 12.4 billion. Standard cleansing interval. Yes, Fleet Master, Thess's arrays brightened. Exit coordinates locked, warp breach in 6 minutes. Drueth did not look up from the file. He had commanded 3 prior extinction cleansings. The mathematics were always the same. Approach, broadcast, neutralize, verify. The Corvathi had never lost a ship to a target that filed trade disputes. The warp field engaged. Space tore open. The fleet emerged 4.2 light hours from Sol, the sun a distant coin, the planets arranged in their familiar dance. Drueth's bridge filled with the soft hum of operational readiness. Broadcast the ultimatum, he said. Thess keyed the channel. Her voice carried the same flat rhythm Vex had used in the Spire, the administrative tone of a species that had never been refused. By order of the Galactic Conclave Security Council, this system is marked for administrative cleansing. All orbital and surface installations will be neutralized. Population centers will be. She stopped. Her compound arrays were flickering, not the bright, eager flicker of engagement, a stutter, a processing lag. Drueth turned his full attention to her, all 6 limbs stilling. Fleet Master, Thess said, I'm reading mass signatures, multiple, large, they're behind us. Drueth did not understand. Behind the fleet was the darkness beyond Neptune, the empty edge of the solar system where nothing had ever been logged. The Kuiper belt was debris and ice. The Oort cloud was theory and dust. Specify, he said. The signatures are consistent with capital-class vessels, heavy cruisers, destroyers. Thess's voice had flattened, the eagerness gone. Fleet Master, there are thousands of them, and they're moving. Drueth turned to the main display. The darkness beyond Neptune was no longer empty. Shapes were resolving, silhouettes against the distant sun, their hulls non-reflective, their thermal signatures minimal until now. The first ship to fully resolve was 2.8 kilometers long. Its name, painted in characters Drueth's translation software identified as human, read Murasame. Then more, the Osaka, the Ganymede, the Silent Ledger. Then the shipyard's mobile construction platforms the size of small moons, their forges still active, their production lines still moving. Drueth did the mathematics. 312 capital ships, 890 heavy cruisers, 2,400 destroyers, 14,000 autonomous drone platforms. He stopped doing mathematics. "Open a channel," he said, to the human commander. The channel established. A woman appeared on his screen, gray at the edges, her left hand holding a steel flask with a dent in it. Behind her, a chipped ceramic cup sat on a console, the steam long gone. She looked at him with the kind of patience that seemed like indifference until you realized it was a blade being sharpened. "You brought 6,000 ships," she said, "to erase 12.4 billion people who filed trade disputes. We have been building for 187 years. We knew this vote would come. The only question was which species would cast it." She set the flask on the console. The dent faced up. "You marked us," she said. "We built for it." Drueth stared at the screen. The human woman had set down her flask and said nothing more. The channel remained open. Behind her, the command center filled with quiet motion, officers at stations, screens showing fleet positions, the soft hum of a ship that had been waiting a very long time to be seen. "Fleet Master," Thess said. Her arrays flickered with a pattern Drueth had never observed in a tactical officer. "The signatures are still resolving. The mobile platforms are active. Their forges they are still producing, Fleet Master. Those ships were not built. They are being built." Drueth closed the channel. He did not need to hear more. He turned to his own fleet, the suppression diamond spread across the dark, 6,000 ships arranged in the formation that had never failed. The mathematics had changed. He needed new mathematics. "All ships," he said, "hold position, reconfigure to defensive sphere, now." Thess's limbs moved across her console, but her arrays did not brighten. "Fleet Master, the defensive sphere assumes a threat from all vectors. We have no data on their weapons range. We have their ship count," Drueth said. "That is enough data." Vance watched the Corvathi formation shift. The diamond flattened, then curved, ships pulling inward like a hand closing into a fist. He had studied suppression doctrine in the academy. The diamond was aggression. The sphere was fear. "Admiral," he said, "they're scared." "Yes," Sen said. She had picked up the flask again, but she did not drink from it. The dent pressed against her thumb. "They should be." She turned to Desai. Status of the ledger. Desai's console showed a red display, one number in the center. She had not seen the number before. It had not been there when she went to sleep. It had appeared when the iron harvest woke, and it had not stopped growing. 4,847, Desai said. "It's ticking down, Admiral." "Every open frequency, every species that voted is being counted." Sen looked at the number. Each digit was a species that had raised a hand against her world. Each digit would know, before this ended, that the count had been made. "Good," she said. "Let them watch." On Station Eternus, in the smallest sector of the conclave chamber, Kurasal sat in her quarters and listened to the open feed. She was 89 years old, assistant to Saren Tal, and she had served the Kavani trade delegation for longer than most species lived. Her hands were small and pale, like her employer's. Her ears, flat, wide, tuned to frequencies most species forgot, caught the subsonic hum of the station's power core, the whisper of air through filters designed for 6,000 chemistries, and the silence from the human frequency that should have been begging. It was not begging, It was counting. Kurasal opened her personal archive. She found the file from 90 years ago, the trade audit that had noticed a discrepancy in human resource allocation. The percentage had been small. The diversion had been consistent. She had flagged it for review. The review had been filed. The filing had been forgotten. She had not forgotten. She played the audio log from the Security Council vote. Vex's voice, flat and administrative. The word cleansing. The number 4,847. Then Saren Tal's footsteps walking out, the crystal in her hands. Kurasal made one note. She wrote it by hand, the way her grandmother had taught her, on paper that could not be remotely deleted. The note was one sentence long. She did not show it to anyone. Drueth opened the channel again. The human woman was still there. The cup was still cold. The flask was still in her hand. Admiral, Drueth said. He used the human rank. He did not know if it was correct. Your fleet is impressive, but we are 6,000. You are. Outnumbered, Sen said. Yes, we have always been outnumbered. She leaned forward. The dent in the flask caught the light from her console. You have a choice, Fleet Master. You can withdraw. You can tell your Archon that the mathematics changed. Or you can stay, and we will show you what 187 years of patience looks like when it stops being patient. Drueth's carapace tightened. He had never been spoken to this way. In 3 prior cleansings, the targets had pleaded, threatened, or gone silent. None had offered him a choice. The conclave voted, he said. Yes, Sen said, they did, and we counted. She closed the channel. The screen went dark. Drueth stood on his bridge, surrounded by 6,000 ships that suddenly felt insufficient. The engagement began 17 minutes later. Not with a shot, with movement. The iron harvest spread across the dark, not in formation but in a pattern Desai had designed, a net, not a wall. The drone platforms moved first. 14,000 autonomous units seeding the space between the fleets with objects too small to register as threats, until they were too close to avoid. Thess saw them first. Mines, she said. Autonomous, non-reflective, thermal dampened. They're on our exit vectors, all of them. Drueth looked at the display. The warp exits were blocked. The Korvathi fleet had dropped in a suppression diamond and now could not leave. The human ships were not attacking. They were waiting. Fleet Master, Thess said. The count on the human frequency, it's still ticking. 4,846. 4,845. Each number is a species. Each species that voted is being. I know what it is, Drueth said. He did not. Not fully. He understood the mechanism, a broadcast, a psychological tool, a way to make the conclave watch its own judgment reflected back. But he did not understand the patience. The 187 years, the flask with the dent, the woman who poured tea while her world was marked for death. Open fire, he said. All batteries, target the closest capital ship. The unyielding verdict fired first. Its forward lance batteries, standard Korvathi suppression armament, tested in 3 prior cleansings, reached across the void toward the Murasame. The beam struck. The Murasame's hull absorbed it, non-reflective coating flaring white, then dissipating. The dreadnought did not return fire. It simply held position, its own weapons cold, its presence enough. They're not engaging, Thess said. Fleet Master, they're not. Fire again, Drueth said. The second salvo struck the Osaka, same result. The third struck the Ganymede. The human fleet took the hits and did not respond. They waited. The count continued. 4,843, 4,842. Vance sat in his fighter, the koi fish on his nose cone, and watched the lance beams cut through the dark. He had not been ordered to fire. He had not been ordered to move. He simply held position with 72 other fighters, arranged in a loose sphere around the command group, and hummed the old folk song under his breath. Admiral, he said, they're burning power on us. We're not burning back. Let them, Sen said. Her thumb moved on the dent. Let them spin what they brought. The first Corvathi ship died at minute 9. It was a destroyer, positioned on the outer edge of the defensive sphere, its shields weakened by the third salvo it had fired. A mine, one of 14,000, drifting cold and silent, touched its hull. The explosion was small by fleet standards. The chain reaction was not. Thess watched it happen. Her arrays flickered with the data, processing too fast, too late. Fleet Master, the mines are proximity activated. They're not on fixed timers. They're waiting for us to move. Drueth understood. The humans had not built a fleet to fight. They had built a fleet to hold, to wait. To let the aggressor spin itself against a wall that did not break, then close the door when the aggressor tried to leave. All ships, he said. Full withdrawal, emergency warp on my mark. The exit vectors are seeded, Fleet Master. The mines. Calculate new vectors, any vector now. The fleet began to turn. 6,000 ships, the largest suppression force the Corvathi had ever assembled, breaking formation in the dark beyond Neptune. The unyielding verdict turned last, Drueth unwilling to show his back until the mathematics demanded it. Sen watched from her command center. The cup was cold. The flask was warm from her hand. She keyed a single channel. Captain Vance, she said, you may fire when ready. Vance stopped humming. He keyed his squadron. 72 on me. Target the mines nearest the retreating ships. Let them see the door close. The fighters moved. Not fast, they did not need to be fast. They moved in a pattern Desai had calculated, a geometry of denial, and where they passed, the mines woke. The Corvathi retreat became a corridor of fire. 3 ships died in the first minute, 7 in the second. By minute 14, the expedition was over. Drueth's flagship took its first hit at minute 9. By minute 14, the suppression fleet was no longer a fleet. It was debris and survivors, 316 ships limping past Jupiter's orbital range, their warp drives damaged, their shields collapsed, their formation shattered. Drueth sat on his bridge. The main display showed the human fleet, still holding position, still not pursuing. The count on the open frequency had stopped. The number was 0. He opened a channel, not to the human woman, to the void, to anyone listening. 12 seconds of silence, then. They were waiting for the vote. The channel closed. 12 seconds of silence, then static. Drueth's voice had carried no fear, only the flat recognition of a man who had finally understood the shape of his mistake. Sen set the flask on the console. The dent faced up. She did not pick it up again. 316 ships limped past Jupiter's orbit, their warp drives coughing, their hulls scarred. Drueth sat on his bridge and watched the human fleet hold position. They were not pursuing. They did not need to. The mines on the exit vectors had done what mines do. They had made leaving more expensive than staying. Fleet Master, Thess said. Her arrays were dim, the flicker gone, replaced by a steady low pulse that Drueth's experience told him was shock. The unyielding verdict has taken hull damage. Sections 7 through 12 are open to vacuum. We have casualties. Drueth did not answer. He was looking at the display, at the human ships arranged in their net, at the mobile construction platforms still producing in the dark. He had brought 6,000 ships to erase a species that filed trade disputes. He had brought administrative procedure to a war that had been building for 187 years. Send a signal, he said, to Archon Vex. Tell him the mathematics have changed. The signal will take hours to reach Station Eternus, Fleet Master. The warp lanes are. Send it anyway. On Station Eternus, the conclave chamber smelled of ozone and old stone. The crystal ceiling still showed frozen rain. The tiered rings were empty now. The delegates returned to their quarters, their chemistries, their routines. But the air was different. It carried a weight that had not been there before the vote. Kurasal sat in the smallest sector and replayed the audio log for the 18th time. She was not listening to the vote. She was listening to what came after. The silence. The human frequency, open and broadcasting, the count ticking down one species at a time. Then the static. Then the single voice Druath's, saying what no Korvathi fleet master had ever said. They were waiting for the vote. She looked at her note. The paper was thin, her grandmother's hand-taught script still clear. One sentence. She had written it knowing what it meant, not knowing if anyone would ever need to read it. The door to her quarters opened. Saren Tal stood in the frame, the data crystal still in her hands, her small form backlit by the corridor's filtered light. "You heard," Tal said. "It was not a question." "I heard," Kurasal said. Tal entered. The door sealed. She set the crystal on Kurasal's desk beside the paper note. The crystal caught the light and threw it back in a thin blue line, the same color it had made in the spire. "The Archon has called an emergency session," Tal said. "He does not know what to say. For the first time in 847 years, Korath Vex does not know what to say." Kurasal looked at the crystal, then at her note. "What is on it?" Tal's small hands folded. "The audit, from 90 years ago, the human resource diversion, I kept it. I kept it because the Kavani keep agreements in good faith and because," she stopped. Her voice, already faint, became fainter. "Because I saw what they were building, not the ships, the patience. I saw it and I did not know what to do with what I saw." Kurasal picked up the paper. She held it out. Tal read the one sentence. Her eyes, small, dark, steady, widened. Then she folded the note and placed it in her own pocket, beside the crystal. "We will not speak of this," Tal said. "Not yet, but we will not forget it either." Vance found Sen on the observation deck. She was alone, the flask in her hand, the cup long cold on a nearby table. The koi fish on his fighter's nose cone had taken a scorch mark near the tail during the engagement, but the fish still swam. He did not know why that mattered to him. It did. "Admiral," he said, "the iron harvest is holding position. The shipyards are still producing. Desai says the ledger is, she's not sure what the ledger is anymore. The count reached 0 and the display didn't go dark. It just changed." Sen turned, her thumb found the dent. "Changed how?" "It's showing names now, ma'am. Species names. The ones that voted, one at a time. Desai says it's still broadcasting on every open frequency." Vance waited. He had known this woman for 11 years. He had seen her pour tea before battles, trace the dent before bad news, hold her silence like a shield. He had never seen her smile. He was not sure she knew how. "The flask," he said. "Your son's, you never talk about him." Sen looked at the steel in her hand. The dent was from the hull breach. The hull breach was from the Proxima border skirmish. The skirmish was from 14 years ago, when humanity had still believed the Conclave would judge them fairly. "His name was Ilias," she said. "Same as yours. He was 22. He wanted to be a teacher. He thought the Navy would pay for school." Vance said nothing. The observation deck showed the stars, the human fleet spread across the dark, the distant glow of the shipyard still building. Somewhere out there, 316 enemy ships crawled toward home, carrying a story that would change what home meant. "I used to think grief was something you carried," Sen said. "Then I thought it was something you used. Now I don't know what it is. The dent is still there. The count is finished, and I don't know what to do with either." She set the flask on the railing. The dent faced the stars. The emergency session began without fanfare. Vex stood at the presiding seat, his armor catching the frozen rain light, his amber eyes scanning the tears. The chamber was half full. Many delegates had not returned. Some were watching the human frequency, the names scrolling one by one, the broadcast that should have ended with a cleansing but had become something else. "The Korvathi fleet has suffered losses," Vex said. His voice carried the flat rhythm, but the rhythm was slower than before. Fleet Master Druoth reports. He reports that the human defensive capability exceeds prior assessment. He requests. He stopped. For the first time in 200 years, Koreth Vex blinked. He requests instructions, Vex finished. A murmur spread through the chamber, not the organized response of a deliberative body, the sound of a species that had never been told no, suddenly hearing the word for the first time. From the smallest sector, Sarental stood. She did not raise the crystal. She simply stood, her small form visible against the tiered stone, and waited until the murmur faded. The Kavani delegation, she said, moves that the Security Council review the original vote. We move that the human species be reclassified from administratively non-compliant to full member in good standing. We move that the conclave acknowledge the. She paused. Her faint voice carried. The miscalculation. Vex's eyes narrowed. On what grounds? Tal reached into her pocket. She did not pull out the crystal. She pulled out Kurasal's note, the one sentence, the paper that could not be remotely deleted. On the grounds, she said, that we saw what others did not, and that we kept it in good faith. The vote was not taken. Vex adjourned the session without a tally, his joints aching as he rose, his armor heavy with the names of 7 extinct species. He walked to his quarters and stood before the window, looking out at the station's docking rings, the ships coming and going, the vast machinery of an empire that had never considered patience a weapon. He thought of the human woman, the flask, the dent, the count. He thought of the Kavani, the smallest species in the chamber, the ones who had noticed 90 years ago and said nothing, who had kept agreements in good faith while watching a fleet grow in the dark. His eyes, amber, vertical, unblinking, stared at the glass. For the first time in 847 years, Koreth Vex wondered if he had been wrong. Not about the vote. The vote was procedure. Procedure was never wrong. He wondered if he had been wrong about what silence meant. Sen was alone when the message came. It arrived on a private frequency, unencrypted, the sender identified only by a species code she did not recognize. She opened it in her quarters, the flask on the table beside her, the chipped cup still holding tea that had gone cold hours ago. The message was one sentence, handwritten, scanned, transmitted across the void from a station she had never visited. We saw, we said nothing, we are sorry. She read it 3 times, then she folded the screen and looked at the flask. The dent was still there, the tea was still cold, the shipyards were still producing in the dark. She picked up the cup. She poured it out into the recycler, the liquid gone, the ceramic empty. Then she set the cup down and placed the flask inside it, the dent facing up, the steel nested in the chipped rim like a hand in a hand. She picked up the cup. She poured it out into the recycler, the liquid gone, the ceramic empty. Then she set the cup down and placed the flask inside it, the dent facing up, the steel nested in the chipped rim like a hand in a hand. The message from the Kavani stayed on her screen. She did not reply. Some words did not need answers. They needed only to be held the way she held the flask, the way the cup held the flask now, 2 empty things keeping each other company. Admiral, Desai's voice came through the open channel, softer than before. The ledger is showing something new. You need to see it. Sen walked to the command center. The screens were alive with names, species designations scrolling in a language she did not read but recognized, the same names that had appeared in the spire of votes, the same species that had raised hands against her world. But the numbers were gone. The count was finished. In their place, each name carried a mark, a single symbol. She did not know what it meant. What is it? She asked. Desai's stylus tapped once, then stopped. It's a trade designation, ma'am. The Kavani use it. It means account held in good faith. Someone is adding it to every species on the list, one at a time, as fast as the names scroll. Sen looked at the screen. The marks appeared faster than she could follow, a quiet flood of recognition spreading across the open frequencies, reaching every corner of the conclave's network. Not an accusation, not a threat, a bookkeeping entry, the kind of thing a species that kept agreements would do. Who? She asked. The source is masked, but the routing. Desai paused. Her hand hovered over the board. The routing traces to Station Eternus, the smallest sector. Sen's thumb found the dent. She did not move it. She simply stood and watched the marks multiply, the silence breaking one species at a time. Vex sat in his quarters and watched the same feed. The names scrolled, the marks appeared. His amber eyes, vertical, unblinking for 2 centuries, tracked each one with a focus that felt, in the hollow space behind his chest, like something he had forgotten how to name. Not fear. He did not fear humans. He feared what they had built without being seen, what they had counted, what they had chosen not to spend. His armor was heavy. The 7 extinct species etched into the plate seemed to press against his hide, their names sharper than he remembered. He had voted to erase them. He had called it administrative hygiene. He had never wondered what they might have built in the dark. The door chimed. He did not answer. It chimed again. Then it opened. Saren Tal stood in the frame, the data crystal in one hand, Kurasal's note in the other. She did not enter. She simply held them out, the crystal catching the light, the paper thin and pale. The emergency session reconvenes in 1 hour, Tal said. I will present the audit. I will present the note. The Kavani will move for full review of the extermination doctrine. Vex did not look at her. He looked at the screen, at the names, at the marks that kept appearing. Do you know what they built? He asked. It was not the question he had meant to ask. It was the only one that mattered. Tal stepped inside. The door sealed. She set the crystal on his desk beside the 7 names. They built, she said, what you could not imagine because you have never had to wait. She turned and left. The crystal remained. The note remained. Vex sat in the silence of his quarters, surrounded by the names of the dead, and for the first time in 847 years, he did not know what procedure to follow. Drueth's fleet reached the warp lane 3 days later. 316 ships, their hulls scarred, their drives coughing, their crews speaking in the low tones of survivors who had seen something they could not explain. The unyielding verdict led them, its lance batteries cold, its bridge quiet. Thess had not spoken since the engagement. Her compound arrays flickered now only when she slept, showing patterns Drueth's medical officer could not interpret. She had tried to do the mathematics one final time, late in the 2nd day, and had stopped when the numbers refused to resolve into anything she recognized. Fleet Master, she said now, her voice small through the carapace speakers. The Archon has recalled us. He has suspended the extermination doctrine, pending review. Drueth looked at the stars. The human fleet was far behind them, still holding position, still not pursuing. The mines had let them pass in the end, not because the mines had failed, because the humans had chosen not to trigger them. And the humans, he asked. Their fleet remains in the Kuiper Dark. The shipyards are still active. They have Thess stopped. Her arrays flickered once, a brief bright pulse, then dimmed. They have filed a trade dispute. Standard format, administrative channel. Drueth's carapace tightened. Then slowly it relaxed. He understood. The dispute was not a dispute. It was a message. We are still here. We still follow your rules. We are waiting for you to break them again. They marked us, he said. We built for it. He did not know why he used the human woman's words. They fit. They fit in a way that made his joints ache with something older than calcification. Set course for home, he said, and Thess. Yes, Fleet Master. Do not do the mathematics, not yet. Let the numbers wait. Sen stood on the observation deck 3 weeks later. The iron harvest orbited Earth in plain sight. The shipyard still produced. The ledger was still open. the names still scrolling, the marks still appearing. The conclave had not voted again. Vex had not spoken in open session. The silence had become a kind of answer, heavy and wrong in the recycled air, but it was not the silence that had come before. Vance joined her. The scorch mark on his koi fish had been painted over, the tail restored, the fish swimming again. He did not hum. He simply stood beside her and looked at the planet below. Desai says the Cavani note is circulating, he said. Not officially. Hand to hand, paper to paper, the kind of thing that can't be remotely deleted. Sen nodded. Her thumb found the dent. She did not move it. She simply held it, the steel warm from her hand, the memory of the hull breach 14 years ago still folded into the metal like a secret. And the crystal, she asked. Still on Vex's desk, last anyone heard. He hasn't moved it, he hasn't destroyed it. Vance paused. He just sits there looking at it. Sen turned from the window. She walked to the small table where the cup sat, the flask nested inside it. She lifted the flask out. The cup was empty. The flask was empty. Both had held something once and both were lighter now. She set the flask on the table. The dent faced the room. Then she set the cup beside it, the chipped rim touching the steel, the ceramic and the metal making a small sound that carried further than it should have. The count is finished, she said. Not to Vance. Not to anyone. She said it because it was true and because some truths need to be spoken into air that does not answer. She walked to the door. She did not look back. The flask and the cup remained on the table, two empty things that had held each other, now holding only the light from the window. Kurasal sat in her quarters on Station Eternus and watched the human frequency. The names had stopped scrolling. The marks had stopped appearing. The ledger was still open, but it showed something new now. Not a count, not a threat. A single line broadcast on every frequency in every language the conclave used. She read it 3 times. Then she folded her screen and looked at the wall, where her grandmother's handwriting, the same hand that had taught her to write on paper, hung in a frame she had carried across 3 systems. The line was not poetry. It was not philosophy. It was the kind of thing a species that kept agreements would say, after the agreement had been tested and found true. She smiled. It was small and faint and no one saw it, but it was there. Vex stood before the conclave chamber 1 month later. The crystal was in his hand. The note was in his pocket. The tiered rings were full, 6,300 chemistries breathing the same air, the frozen rain light still caught in the ceiling 800 meters above. He did not speak of the vote. He did not speak of the humans. He spoke of procedure, of review, of the administrative necessity of re-examining classifications that had been made in haste. His voice carried the flat rhythm, but the rhythm was slower now, and the spaces between the words held something that might have been caution. No one challenged him. The smallest sector watched. The Cavani did not stand. They did not need to. Their note was in enough hands now, their mark on enough names, their good faith visible in a way that procedure could not erase. When he finished, Vex walked to the smallest sector. He stood before Saren Tal. He held out the crystal. I do not know what to do with this, he said. Tal took it. Her small fingers closed around the blue light. Keep it, she said, or file it. The Cavani do not tell others how to keep their records. Vex's eyes blinked once. The amber slits narrowing, then opening, the first time anyone had seen it in 200 years. He turned and walked out. The chamber doors sealed behind him. The air still smelled of ozone. The crystal ceiling still showed frozen rain. But in the smallest sector, a paper note remained on a desk, 1 sentence long, written in a hand that could not be remotely deleted. The flask was empty, the dent was still there, the count was finished. She set it down on the console and did not pick it up again.